Hello, everybody, and welcome to Diet Wars, the podcast that critically examines various dietary claims to get to the bottom of which diet is best for human health. This episode, I talked to I don't actually know his name. His name is Diablo on Discord. It's my Discord server. I thought this was a really cool episode and a reason to start a first episode because this isn't your typical health expert, but rather he is a representative of a very common ideological strain within the diet health world, namely low carbohydrate diets. The reason I decided to talk with him was that he was sending messages on my server saying that that carbohydrates will cause diabetes, that he lost, I think, 150 to 200 pounds, and that he wanted to tell me and everybody else that carbohydrates were the reason for his problems and people should wise up to dangerous refined carbohydrates, seed oils, and other toxic foods that can cause adverse health outcomes, which he has discovered himself through his own dietary experiments. I thought that it would be interesting to figure out what was behind this. Why was he saying these things, and could he back them up? So I sat down and talked to him, and about, 10 or 15 minutes into the conversation, we hit record. Before we hit record, we had talked about, I think that one of the biggest points was that doctors are not trained in nutrition science. We have almost zero training in nutrition science whatsoever. So there is a big distinction between what doctors tell you and what nutrition science knows. So the point that I made to him was, just because a doctor is telling you that does not mean that is what the establishment thinks. Furthermore, and this is probably a controversial point, at least to say in public, but dietitians are not particularly well trained in the United States, and they are not really very well trained in science. So for that reason, often referring to dietitians is not helpful either. So we agreed on those points, and we agreed that most of the authorities that he was discussing his health issues with and dietary concerns were not qualified to actually comment on them, even though they often behaved as if they were. And I wanted to point out that I understood his sense of frustration at this fact, and his sense that because he has discovered this new way of doing things that worked, whereas the authorities said that it shouldn't have worked, I wanted to say that I understood his perspective there and appreciated it and could see where he was coming from. And that constituted most of the first 10 minutes of our discussion. And then we kicked on the recorder. And I hope you will enjoy this discussion that I had with him. Many people thought that I was perhaps being a little too nice. I think that's the appropriate approach in these kinds of situations, and that is the approach I'll continue taking, at least with lay people. We'll see what happens whenever we get a big dog on the podcast. There may be another co-host to this podcast that will be announced. I just wanted to get this one up and going and off its feet, especially since I thought this was an interesting discussion and it was a nice way to start things off. I hope you will appreciate what you are about to listen to. And without further ado, here is episode 1 of the Diet Wars podcast. Yeah, so you keep meeting a bunch of people who have a similar story as you, and you realize that means that this is something that's real. Like, it's denied by the doctors that you talk to. It's almost like you shouldn't exist. All of their advice that they tried to use to help you didn't work. And yet you and many other people like you exist and have found that it works. And it's frustrating to deal with that. And you want people to understand that. And so whenever you get into these chat situations on this text chat situations, you tend to give a somewhat simplified version because you're just trying to get people to understand something that you've learned that you think is very important. Yeah.
Yeah, because it's just the weirdest thing where like people who know me in real life, who have seen the real me, they watched me lose weight. I mean, you can see it in them. They just something in them doesn't understand, and it's a bizarre situation where they knew me when I was 340. They know me now. I'm about 180. They saw me lose that weight. They still remember. And they're like, well, how'd you do it? And I explained to them, and it's like, well, you're a liar. I'm like, but you saw me do it.
Yeah.
Am I a magician? Did I do some sleight of hand that I myself am not aware of?
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of arguments to be made where, maybe my numbers were wrong, like the nutrition facts panels on that are mandated by law. Those are kind of screwy, but they're not screwy enough where I miscalculated 1,500 calories a day.
Well, I mean, as we said, though, right? It's like you were basically yo-yoing. You'd try to maintain it, and then it would fall apart, and then you'd eat more, right? So it wasn't always that you're taking in 1,500 calories a day, right?
No, that's not what I meant. For me to have lost it on a 2,000 calorie diet, I would have been wrong 1,500 calories. People argue over how many calories are in a pound of fat. The answer 4,000 is wrong, but it's usually what people use for the math on, back of the napkin math. I would have, been not eating 1,500 calories.
Oh, yeah. It's just saying you lost a bunch of weight and you were losing more weight than you should have.
Yeah, there's literally no way for me to have been losing weight on 2,000 calories a day. Either technically, I'm giving their argument that I measured it wrong. That either I was eating 4,000 before, and that can't be possibly right. Otherwise, then every single nutrition facts panel is grossly wrong. Or I was eating air for a year.
Yeah. So here's what it sounds like. Here's what the possibility sounds like to me. It's that, so I think eating 2,000 calories a day when you're above 300 pounds, I think you can lose weight eating 2,000 calories a day. I think that many people's basal metabolic rate will be, and total energy expenditure for the day will be higher than 2,000 calories per day. So I think that sounds reasonable to me if you know for sure that you were eating 2,000 calories a day. And then whenever you said you were trying to diet, you're trying to limit the calories. The fact that sometimes you had periods where you'd be overeating just because it didn't feel sustainable to you, so you would have periods where you binge. It seems reasonable.
I would go from not eating to making up for it.
Right. So it sounds like I'm not saying that you're eating 4,000 calories. It's probably a little high. Well, maybe on some days you could be, but on average, I would say you might have been eating above 3,000, and just because you were making up for it during those
the year before I went on paleo, I kind of gave up everything. I was like, you know what? I don't need that crap in my life. So I was eating what I wanted.
Yeah.
But I was measuring it. I was looking at the boxes. I should have actually made a better log, because now I kind of wish I could publish it.
Sure.
I didn't really think of it back then.
Yeah.
But it was about 2,000 a day.
Well,
with no intervention. Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, so that is what I naturally eat.
For a year, you're logging every single day, and you're eating 2,000 a day for a year?
Mm-hmm. I was eating probably more processed foods than I should have, but I went on my diet around the time my mom died, and she cooked a lot, but I never quite learned how to cook. So after she died, I just sort of did what a lot of people do, just buy stuff that's frozen.
Yes.
And throw it in the microwave. I don't recommend doing that, but that's what I did.
Of course not.
So while I went through paleo, I also learned how to cook. I think everybody should learn how to cook, by the way.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, so when you're eating everything out of a frozen box, it's literally you record, 3 or 4 things that are written on the back of the packet.
Yeah, but you'd do this consistently, and you didn't have any days where you went over?
Pretty much no. Not enough to I kind of plateaued at 340-ish.
Yeah.
But it's just too much. Nobody should weigh 340.
Yeah, it's too much. Yeah. It would be nicer if you had, more records, because it's hard to know, right? It's hard to know for certain if you didn't record for certain exactly how much you were taking in. Like for me, for example, I'll have periods where I record for a week just because I do it like every once a year or something. I'll record for a week just because I don't like recording all the time. It's just a pain in the ass.
It is.
But
I've
whenever
kind
you
of
do
quit
it,
doing it now.
but every once in a while when you do it for a few days, you're like, holy shit. You like really realize so much more about your diet than you did before. It's an eye opener. For everybody I've ever counseled as well, and definitely for me. So it's sometimes hard to know exactly how much we're taking in. That would be my one argument. And then the other thing is did you start exercising after you went on paleo as well, or was
No,
exercise the
that's
same? Okay.
something, because I was reading, lots and lots of stuff, because it's finally, hey, this is something new. I want to learn about this because this is what I do. I like really over obsess about new subjects.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, what factors can screw this up for me? This is why I was measuring what I ate for almost a year, that was simple. It's just literally, am I eating around 2,000 a day? It can be a little under, a little over, just around that.
Yeah.
And it's like, what am I doing now that I should continue doing after that? And exercise was one of them, because that burns calories. I am horrible at exercise.
Yeah.
I can tell you lots of stuff about how to exercise, what to do. There are great people I follow on YouTube. I do none of it even now. I should, and I don't.
Right. So
Exercise
it
is
was all
not
diet.
an explanation.
What about walking? Did you change your amount of walking?
I did that after I lost the weight.
Okay. I'm just curious at that point, but I think that the fact that without having really careful logging, it's really hard to know exactly how much you're taking in before and after. That's all I'll say. It's like, you know what I mean? Because if you look at the scientific studies, there doesn't seem to be a huge disadvantage to eating hyper processed foods as far as energy expenditure is concerned. So it's just it's like this. It's like this. If you have an anecdote and it's not super carefully documented, and it flies in the face of what we think we know about how metabolism works, sort of the onus is more on you, I would say. I don't know.
I know.
What do you think
But
about that? Yeah.
It's weird when I start hearing my story being told back to me. Like, I'll read stuff like Mark Sisson and other blogs will publish people's stories, and I'm like, a lot of these elements sound pretty damn familiar because that's my story, and I'm like, well, what the hell are we missing? I will say something that's kind of disgusting, but early on when I was really losing weight, like, it was almost scary in the beginning. When I did it, I was losing like 2 pounds a week. And that's like, kind of excessive.
Well, yeah.
Some of the poop was kind of greasy, so to say.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how much unburnt fat was I pooping out? You can't measure that.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. Especially at the beginning when I don't know what it is. I think it's like a fat adaptation period. I've experienced that too. I was on. I did a kind of paleo type diet for almost, I don't know, 5-7 years. Like in a serious way, and then another 3 years, a little more moderate. But yeah, and I know what you're talking about, and I think that could be a factor as well. I'm not 100% sure, but that makes sense because
the calories have to go somewhere.
Right. Food absorption. Yep. Yeah, I think that makes some sense. I wonder if that's part of some people's experience. I know that we know that for sure that absorption can vary on different diets, but I don't know if that's ever been shown to be a big factor in high fat diets. But maybe they just haven't designed the studies in the right way to tease that out. But
I don't think they have done it, because I looked, because somebody who's into endocrinology I met on IRC told me, Leo, well, what about this? And I'm like, well, it's a good idea, but it's like, I'm not going to pay a whole crap load of money to have somebody look at my poop.
Yeah. Yeah. So the one thing I would say is, though, is having a lot of people with similar stories, it could be also similar biases, right? Like, there are people with different stories in all sorts of different areas that like, for example, anti-vaxxers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Often children get autism, or they have, I don't know how you think about anti-vax. What do you do you believe in anti-vax, or?
Okay, disclaimer, I have been diagnosed with autism.
Okay.
And I find what they do to be very dangerous because of the certain genes that are implicated in autism. Usually you have people who also are severe asthmatics who have other issues. And when I was in grade school, I had to get permission from my doctor to go to school because I couldn't be vaccinated because of my asthma. They thought I would run too much risk.
Okay.
Though those parents didn't really exist when I was a kid, but if they did, that could have been putting my life in danger. It was the herd immunity that was keeping me alive.
Right.
I agree with. I mean, I'm not gonna say I agree because I don't. I understand what they're talking about. Some ways we have made vaccines in the past were dangerous if you look in that as in isolation, but given how many lives they saved, I consider that a good trade-off. And a lot of those techniques we don't use anymore. Like there's no mercury in vaccines anymore. You can't use that as an argument anymore. It was already gone when I was a kid. And also, here's another thing. If I was not vaccinated until I was older, why do I have autism?
Yeah.
Their argument's kind of falling apart.
My understanding about how autism often works is that when kids are very young, that's whenever they often have and it's probably related to something in the immune system or some sort of mitochondrial dysfunction or something like that causes some sort of inflammatory reaction in the brain. Or that's one of the theories, or probably one of the causal pathways. And it's thought that happens during early childhood. And so when people have vaccines, they get their kid a vaccine. Then they see, a week later, they see this deterioration that is very common, or is a common feature of children who have autism. They'll have a sort of deterioration for a period, and a loss of skills, loss of functions. It's probably because it's some sort of brain damage that's going on related to some sort of inflammatory reaction. Then they say, okay, well, they had the vaccine, and then a week later they got the autism. But by sheer chance, if autism happens in this way commonly during early childhood, and vaccines are also given at the same period of time, by chance you're going to get a substantial number of people, maybe hundreds or thousands of people, who are going to see this relationship between, okay, my kid got a vaccine and suddenly they're very sick and they have autism. But that doesn't necessarily mean that connection is caused, that the vaccine caused that syndrome. So
I completely agree with that.
So, but what these guys could be saying, they could be on Twitter, or they could be on different message boards, or even on Discords. They could be talking to each other and saying, "Hey, you had this story happen to you, and I had the same exact story. We have the same exact story. Isn't this strange? How it appears that that vaccines caused our children's autism."
And that's why, when you look at this stuff, you personally have to play the devil's advocate and say,
Right.
which things could explain this that, don't fit your narrative, because that's good science.
Yes. So that's the only thing I would say, and it's hard because when you're in the situation that you're in, you don't have this scientific legitimacy. You're not on some sort of guidelines committees, and you're not making policy, so you don't have power. So, but you think that, and it is true. Your truth, the things that you experience, are important, and if people understood the power that diet could have over disease, they would be. And I'm going to type something really quick, but I'll finish that statement before I do. they would be much better off, and the world would be a much better place if people really understood truly the power that what you have done, what a lot of people like you have done, can have over disease and preventing disease and helping people to be healthy. But you don't have the power to communicate that any other way except over, these kinds of chats here. So sometimes you oversimplify a little bit.
Because what I've been actually considering doing is writing a series of blog entries that compile most of what science knows about it in English. Because I should actually do it for myself too. Because I'm not a scientist. I do enjoy reading about this stuff. I get into more depth than most people do. But it's like, I can only type the same thing so many times before I'm tired of writing.
Right.
It's just like, most people are just going to say, you're a liar and you didn't do it. And I'm like, well, I can look down and there ain't a big gut hanging here anymore. I can look down and I'm maybe not exactly the weight I want to be because, you're right about the whole thing with weight gain and insulin resistance, all that stuff. I have belly fat. That's never going to go away.
Well, I mean, if you've lost a lot of weight, then you've lost a lot of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Hey, but most of it was on the limbs and stuff. It wasn't at the inside fat.
Are you sure? Are you sure you haven't lost much inside fat?
Well, I probably have some, but that's where all of it is.
Yeah.
It's the weirdest thing. I used to, when I was fat, I just looked big. Yeah. Now I kind of look fat. It's weird.
Right. Yeah.
I need to lose about another 15 pounds or so.
It's probably a lot of it's just on the belly. That's not necessarily on the inside. It's the stuff that's on the inside of the abdomen that's the problem. Like, if you have a really wide waist, that's independent of the amount of belly fat that you have. So you just have a little bit of belly fat or a substantial amount of belly fat, but like most of your girth is actually not from the belly fat. It's like from your girth itself. That's like an indication that there might be more inside fat. I'm saying don't worry yourself too much.
No, I don't. It either goes away or it doesn't.
Right. Yeah. Is this a debate anymore, a counseling session? Well, the bottom line is as much as a lot of people think that I'm like an asshole on Twitter and online, like this is really my thought process about how I think about, I don't know, people's experiences. I understand that it's like a lot more that when people go crazy on Twitter and they start saying stuff that's like I think is clearly not true, often there's a lot of other things that are underneath that if you just talk to the person and start pulling that out, then I don't know. I think that it doesn't help to try to just show somebody else is wrong. It helps to understand them. So the one thing that I worry about whenever sometimes people with stories like you and then people with this whole story that carbohydrates are the devil and they're evil and they're going to cause everybody to be fat. The one thing I worry about is, first off, I don't think that's true. And so because I don't think that's true, and even though I can understand and I completely believe your story, I don't believe the part about the calories necessarily, but I believe that low carb really helped you to lose weight and was extremely beneficial for your health and in the sort of paleo template. I believe all of that, but I don't believe that carbohydrates per se. I don't believe if you're eating legumes like lentils. I don't believe if you're eating a high quality, high carbohydrate diet that you are going to necessarily cause metabolic problems. I think you can lose weight and be very lean and healthy on a high carb diet. And I think that maybe even you could personally with the right sort of, I'm not sure about that, but maybe.
Yeah, because remember, I lost most of the weight not doing low carb. It may have been naturally lower carb.
Right.
But without access to refined sugars, it's going to be anyway.
Yeah. No, I believe all that, and I think that that's a good way to lose weight. And but what I'm saying is like some of the foods that you now might suggest cause health problems. What I'm saying is I don't believe that those do. Like I don't believe beans cause health problems, for example. I believe that
not in the sense of carbs. I don't.
What do you mean?
The paleo look on that is generally they cause problems because of the chemicals they contain, not necessarily any nutritional way. I mean, that would be a separate conversation.
Yeah, like the lectins and stuff, and the anti-nutrients. Yeah, But are they going to cause you to gain a lot of body fat?
I don't know. See, the thing is,
Okay.
I'll sometimes just think about this. It's like, I'm not going to say I'm wrong because that's kind of silly. I lost a weight. I know I did. I know what my measurements said. It's what is the exact concrete link between nutrition poor diets and weight gain? Because there is a link. Science has sort of gone down that path.
No, we definitely know that there's a link for sure. A strong link.
Yeah, but it's like at least I can't go find a paper that says, yes, it's exactly this mechanism on this gene in this part of the chromosome.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, so that's where I think if people like knew your story telling me, and actually it's been recorded, much of it has been recorded, I think we might have missed the part where you lost what, you're at 340 pounds now, and you're now in your hundreds, and you did that by restricting refined grains.
Yeah, so let me say it again.
Sugar,
So it's
sugar, and seed oils. And go ahead.
From 1 January 1st to the next, so exactly 365 days, I went from 340 to 214, and then by March, I was 184. A good chunk of it was in the beginning. I stripped out refined sugars. I stripped out seed oils. I technically stripped out legumes, but I'm not really big on those to begin with. I also have a nut allergy. So, I mean, well, I have a peanut allergy. I also have a nut allergy, and peanuts are not nuts. But that's because you're supposed to eat nuts under paleo. I can't. I ate the vegetables. I ate the fruit. I ate the meat with no restriction as long as I can eat it. But because I ate that way, obviously, it was a more nutritionally focused diet. I did not target carbs. It would have been, let's say, moderate carbs, because there's really no definition of any of this. I certainly wasn't high anymore.
Sure.
My insulin, my A1C dropped, my weight dropped, and technically, by the rules of calories in, calories out, I can't explain it.
That's the one part I just would push back on, is that I don't think you have you've had careful enough records to know for sure that you were not
to do if you've never done it before.
Yes, yeah, totally. But the fact that, but without having those records, I feel like we can't. I feel like if we have science saying one thing in many studies that I'm persuaded by, I think they're compelling. If we have science saying one thing and then your story, which is not super well documented, saying another thing, I think that going with science makes sense.
I wish I could repeat it, but that seems to be impossible.
Well, it seems to be impossible to repeat it, or what?
Yeah, well, because you're never going to find another one of me, and I'm not going to gain weight to try it again.
Right.
Like I said, nutrition facts panels would have to be so ridiculously off that that's the only way to really explain that I recorded it wrong.
Or whenever on the days when you weren't tracking as well, you just overate more than you think you did.
That's the thing, though. I kind of eat consistently. Like, the reason I don't track calories now is because I eat consistently. Like, I make a really good beef stew. I use the same amount of ingredients in it every time, and it takes me, say, 3 or 4 days to eat it. There isn't a lot of variation in it. I eat actually ridiculously boringly.
Yeah.
I've been bouncing around in my head on how to, be the devil's advocate and try to figure out how I did this wrong. I can't. What
is it that's important to you about, or is there something about it not being about calories in, calories out? Like, would you be okay with the idea, would you lose anything? Would you feel like anything is lost in your story if you came to think that the mechanism behind your weight loss was just that you felt a lower physiological, biological need to consume calories on your new diet because it had higher quality through some other mechanisms? We actually don't quite understand these things yet. There's people working on this, like Kevin Hall is working on this, and he had a study last year about hyper-processed foods. You might have seen it in the media, and he's going to have another one this year that's going to be it's going to blow things up a lot. But we still don't understand the mechanisms by which food processing, fat intake, all these others, they modulate calorie intake. But would you be okay thinking that through some mechanism that we don't understand precisely, you just were consuming fewer calories?
Well, okay, here's the thing is, well, how do you define consuming? Because that becomes sort of a weird thing, because if the calories go in my mouth but do not,
Yeah.
do not enter my mitochondria or do not enter my fat cells and go straight through. Well, have I actually consumed them? Because that becomes a weird thing.
Okay, so if you're saying that you just poop out, you're not absorbing them. So do you think your belief is that you're not absorbing them, or is it
It's
some
weird
other...
because I talked to my doctor about this. Of course, my doctor was like, "What are you doing? Stop that." I'm like, "Nope, I'm doing it. You either can help me with it or not." He said that, yeah, some people who are overweight and are losing weight have this problem, that they, have greasy poops. It's like,
Okay,
well, why is it greasy? Well, it's fat.
right.
So if there's
That's,
fat in your poop, well, then you didn't absorb it. That's like
Sure.
the only reasonable out I've ever been able to find. And it's like I can't Google that. It's bizarre, that's for sure.
I don't have any problem with that. It could be the case in your particular case. I don't know if we have a lot of evidence for that. All I would say is you don't know that that's the case in every case. That's one thing I would say. And you don't know that that's the case for sure, even in your case. It's just an hypothesis. So, but
That's why I
that's
like science, by the way, because I can look at what other people did and like, well, this happened to them. And it's like, well, possibly it happened to me too. And possibly that's the explanation.
Sure,
I would absolutely love to see a huge study on a strict paleoized keto diet or just even normal paleo.
Yeah.
On people who are overweight and pre-diabetic. Because, people who are like me, I want to see what is legitimately scientifically proven. Because it would help me and understand what happened to me.
Hey, and all you guys all you guys hating on this guy saying he sounds like Gary Taubes, like, I'm sorry, this is how I try to be I try to be charitable with other people. This is how I am with my patients. And I feel like this is the right way to be with people. This guy's just telling me a story. He has some ideas. I can't like say that these are definitely wrong. I don't think that any studies have shown the effects that he's saying. So I don't know how they could be right, but maybe some of these studies are designed in such a way that cannot actually produce these effects. So maybe that might be the reason, or maybe he's unique as an individual. I can't say. The only thing I'm concerned about here is that he spreads information that might not be accurate or might not be relevant to other people. And that's what bothers me here. That's why I'm talking to him about this and trying to figure out even if we can just have a decent conversation and understand each other. And it seems like we're able to, but I don't feel like going on the offensive and trying to show how he's wrong, which I can't really show how he's wrong. I can't, because he's an individual and we don't have the science of him. Like, we don't have him fully characterized as a organism, so we can't say exactly how he works. So I can't really do that. It has to be this coming together of the science on the one hand and individuals on the other, and there's a gap there that I can't fill. So I can't like be like, you're wrong. I'm not going to be like that. I feel like that's inappropriate. So I'm just not going to do that. All right, let's move on to just because I feel like we're not getting anywhere here. Let's move on to the carbs and diabetes thing. Yeah, I think carbs can cause diabetes in the sense that if you're over consuming them, like you find them easy to over consume and find them easy to gain weight on. Or if you're just absorbing them, and then whenever you switch to a high fat diet, you're just not absorbing your food as much. I don't know if that's quite. Are you still having the sort of greasy stools?
No, that went away when apparently my body became fat adapted.
So then that can't be the explanation. That can't be the mechanism for why you're able to maintain weight now, right? Because if that mechanism isn't in play anymore, then now suddenly you're absorbing more calories. You should be gaining the weight back. Would you say?
Yeah. But
Okay.
but the thing is, if I'm 36, male, and exactly 6 foot tall, how many calories should I eat a day to maintain my weight?
You're how much and how tall are you and how much weight are you?
Yeah, 6 feet tall, even. Let's say 180.
Yeah, 180. Well, you can plug that into a calculator. I'm not sure exactly what the range is on the variability is for plugging those numbers into a calculator, but I'm pretty sure a calculator can give you a rough estimate. There's equations that can do that.
Yeah, well,
But
the thing is, I've done it before, and it's some say 1,700 something, some say 1,800 something, some say 1,900 something. I'm not eating. No?
That's too low. Like I'm at like 190. Wait, sorry, I'm at 180. I'm at about 190 now.
Well, maybe I've been
And,
using the wrong calculators.
Yeah. Let me go hook you up with some good scientific calculators. Yeah, I think it's close to what Krish Knapp is saying. Trish Knapp. I think it might be a little less than 2,800, but
Yeah, because I definitely don't eat 2,800 a day. That's way too much for me.
it would be interesting for you to log that for a couple weeks, and then log your weight at the same time, and maybe that would be interesting. But the point is that can't be the mechanism that's maintaining your weight anymore. So that's one strike against this idea that's maybe steatorrhea was causing more weight loss, like you were losing it faster because you had that, like you had the greasy stools. But maybe now, since that mechanism is not in play anymore, it's not inducing as much of a deficit as it might have been in the past. I think that's reasonable to say.
It's possible.
Yeah. Okay.
Because I mean, the thing is, it's like I can't. I mean, it's everybody who says I'm lying. It's like, yeah, I can't explain the exact mechanics. I can just say this is what I did. This is to my best of my knowledge. This is what the calories came out to, and this is what my weight did.
Hopefully you don't think that I'm saying that you're lying, right?
No,
That's
you're probably as confused as I am.
A real scientist should be confused whenever the evidence is not completely clear. So that's what I'm trying to do here. So let's talk about the diabetes, though. I think we've more or less exhausted that issue. I think, as I said, carbs can cause weight gain if you're over consuming them, if they cause you to over consume calories. And I think that in the case of like refined carbs, which are delicious, I love eating refined carbs. They taste so good. It's going to help you to eat more. Or it's
Well, there's also
prompt you to
another
eat
problem.
more. Yeah.
The whole because I mean you probably already know this, but the whole insulin resistance issue, mine was bad. Mine was like to the point of where I was in my early 30s, and my doctors were like, we might as well just start saying you have diabetes now. It was like it was basically to the point of where it was beyond pre-diabetic. I forget exactly what they were, but they were horrible. It is possible where you're so off the goddamn charts and you're not being treated for it. Every calorie you're eating is just being shoved into your fat cells, and it's not coming back out. Because guess what? As I was gaining weight, I felt like shit.
Yeah.
No matter what I ate, no matter how much I ate, I felt like shit. I was tired and exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
Now I know that's a hallmark sign of all this going wrong, and I should have never gotten that bad.
Who have you learned about insulin resistance from? Like, what are the big guys that you've learned the most from?
Well, kind of my doctor. My doctor gave it to me straight, the way doctors teach it. It was helpful to understand it, but it wasn't enough, because he should have said, don't eat carb. Well, he didn't.
Well, who else have you been learning from?
Well, not any single person. I'll follow somebody on like YouTube for a while, and I'm like, let's try somebody else.
Okay.
I want to hear from everybody,
Okay. Who would you say you've learned the most from, though? Is there anybody that comes to mind?
Not really.
Okay.
I mean, as odd as it sounds, it's never actually been that interesting, because I understand the mechanism enough. I also know that now diet soda screws you, and I drank enough of that as a kid.
I think that's controversial. I don't think that's clear.
Well, it seems to cause an insulin spike when it shouldn't.
Yeah, but
I drank an awful lot of it.
Yeah, but the question is do insulin spikes cause weight gain?
That I'll agree that there's no definitive answer, but it seems to be close enough that I'm willing to accept that.
Okay, fair enough. Here's where I come at this from. High carb, low carb diet, the main determinant of whether or not you will gain weight and then you will become insulin resistant is the quality of the diet. So if you're consuming a bunch of donuts and frozen dinners and basically junk food from the store, which I don't eat much of at all, then it's going to be really easy to gain weight because it's easy to overconsume calories and so on and so forth. Same actually with a high fat diet. Like there's high fat diets that are actually, they taste so good, and I've done this personally, where they're also easy to gain weight on. So the way to lose weight is to change the diet in such a way that you can increase your satiety, you don't feel as much hunger, and you stop consuming so many calories. And so I think that a high and a low carb diet can do that in just the same way. And so when you say that it's the carbs. To some extent, I understand what you're saying. I get it. The refined carbs at the store, because actually much of the junk food and much of the garbage food at the store, those foods are going to tend to cause a lot of people to overeat. But what I'm saying is it is not the carbohydrate content in those foods per se. It is not that content in the foods that's causing people to overeat. And it's not the insulin in those foods that's causing people to overeat. It's another mechanism. It's in the brain that, basically we just want to eat more. Because
I get that mechanism, because
right.
it's the weirdest thing is when you change your diet, and like I can't explain this to people who have never done it, but everybody who has done it completely understands. It's when you quit eating those foods for an extended period, you go down on your new diet completely religiously.
Yeah.
And it's weird. You eat the foods that you used to, and they're meaningless. They don't do anything. It's like you ate nothing at all.
Yeah.
You get no pleasure from it. You get nothing. In fact, now everything tastes hyper sweet.
Right. Yeah.
And it's like I don't want this. Who eats this stuff? And it's like then you remember, oh yeah, I used to eat this stuff.
Because if somebody wanted to eat like beans and whole grains and nuts and a lot of other things that you're not necessarily eating right now, what I'm saying is they could still lose the weight that you've lost if they follow the same principles, which is to say, cut out hyper processed foods and all that stuff. So what bothers me whenever people suggest that carbohydrates are causing obesity, carbohydrates are causing diabetes, while it may work to restrict carbohydrates and then to lose weight, it's not necessarily the carbohydrates that are causing this problem. And therefore, if people say that carbohydrates are the problem, they're actually reducing the range of options that they have for losing weight. And I think that's important for this one particular reason. For many people, eating more saturated fat and animal products will cause their LDL cholesterol to go up, which I believe, and I think the vast majority of cardiologists believe, is a major risk factor in cardiovascular disease. So if we have other ways of people being able to lose weight that doesn't involve so much saturated fat and animal products, then we will have a strategy that will, in most people, not cause an increase in cardiovascular disease risks. That's my concerns. I don't want people to lose the options that they have, their healthy eating options, whenever they hear that carbohydrates are bad. Sure, carbohydrates as a heuristic, cutting them out can allow people to lose weight, but not necessarily, and not because of the carbohydrate content per se. What would you say about that?
I agree with it. And I mean, this thing is, it's like I said before, I do simplify my responses because it just, you can only say the same thing only so many times. You just get tired of writing it. I should say, and I agree, I should say you should focus on a diet that is focuses on nutrition, not just, the other stuff. This is what turned me on to paleo originally. They were making that argument. They were saying, it isn't really how much you eat. It isn't really this. It isn't really that. Even if you don't agree that you shouldn't eat grains or don't agree that you shouldn't eat dairy, you should focus on nutritional density. That was the novel part of paleo from when it was pitched to me.
Yeah.
And it's like, there is such a thing as empty calories. That is a thing that really does exist, and you should be avoiding those. Well, most of the empty calories happen to be carbs. You simplify it, it becomes carbs are bad.
Sure.
It's not a great way of doing it, but for the average person, that's kind of what they need to know, unless we start making foods. Because processed foods, since they're not quote unquote real, kind of exist to meet or beat a benchmark. And the benchmark currently is, are people buying the product? If nobody's buying it, you got to keep tweaking.
Yes.
They don't care about nutrition. Yeah. I don't go to the store. I don't buy junk food and say, how much nutrition's in it. No, I care what it tastes like.
Yes.
So
Yep.
until we have junk food that is excessively fatty but has no nutrition, which that kind of used to exist. That's technically the niche hot dogs fits in. I don't really have to worry about that when I'm explaining that to the average person. I can just say, eat good food and you'll lose weight. Just don't go crazy on the carbs.
Well,
Like,
I mean,
the whole thing at the
yeah.
beginning, I was doing paleo and not paying attention to the carbs. I lost the weight. So
Yeah.
clearly, with my own evidence, carbs isn't the exactly damning thing. I only switched to keto to get the last few pounds off, which has been working, by the way.
Okay. Sounds like we're in agreement. I agree that a paleo dietary pattern can really help people to lose weight. I do worry though that, and actually you made another point about having hyper palatables, basically junky high fat foods, low carb foods, and actually those do exist, right? There are like Atkins bars. There's an increasing amount of paleo junk food and of low carb junk food. And if people think that just being paleo, quote unquote, or just being low carb, quote unquote, is okay, and then you can eat those junk foods and you'll be fine, that could be something harmful as well. Not just
I agree
taking
with
away.
that.
Yeah.
I've been starting to see them on the store shelves around here, and I'm like, well, who's buying these things? I'm not.
Yeah.
Like, most of them have nuts in them, and I said I'm allergic to nuts. I can never eat one of those.
Yeah. And you can imagine how appealing that would be to people, because then it's like, okay, so long as I'm keto, I can still eat these delicious foods. And then they don't even deal with the problems because a lot of people, it's very difficult to, sometimes very difficult to change, especially things that you're very accustomed to, especially if your life is stressful and you lean on these very hyper palatable foods as a way of coping with that stress. And a lot of people do that. A lot of ideas that oversimplify things in these ways, saying it's all about carbs, it's all about not eating paleo, it's about eating paleo and not eating refined grains, all et cetera, et cetera. They also have the potential to lead people down, and actually not lead. They have the potential to facilitate the sorts of lies that we want to tell ourselves about what we need to do in order to change our health and prevent people from. That's actually a really interesting philosophical problem. Like, is it okay to help people to continue to live in their own delusion? We're getting down the rabbit hole, unfortunately.
I agree with what you're saying in a way.
Yeah.
Well, I think I said this before, but when I was at 340, I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna ask the great resource that is the internet, because I'm like a native citizen of the internet. It's been in my life. I mean, I'm in my 30s. It's been my life the whole time. I'm one of those unique individuals.
Yeah.
I'll see what people are doing, because clearly, the doctors can't help me. I discovered keto. I looked at what they were doing. I'm like, those are nutty people. Like, you're eating the stuff you're not supposed to eat. This is like before paleo. I already knew, like, you can't sit down and eat a package of Kraft Singles.
Yeah.
I can't go eat a stick of butter a day. And that's a thing. And that's no, don't do that. For God's sakes, don't do that. But this is what they were saying. And I'm like, no, I don't want anything to do with it. They're nut jobs. Well, they were kind of right. It's just they were eating the wrong things to do it. And I think if you're kind of going into the thing of where, well, it's high fat, low carb, it's food. It's like, well, no, it's not. That's just sort of a thing that's becoming now. That didn't exist 5 years ago. All these foods targeted for keto. At least they weren't around.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. That's true. These are becoming things now. But that's the danger, right? That's the danger of oversimplification. When you oversimplify, people then can then take these oversimplifications and turn them into stories that you didn't even intend for them to ever to become, and then you end up undermining through these unintended consequences the very things you were trying to achieve by oversimplifying. So if you want to say it's just carbs, and you're like, okay, just as long as you tell people it's just carbs, they'll be fine because they'll cut out most of their hyper-palatable, hyper-processed foods. But then then the big companies will be like, oh, hey, wait a second. So if we go with this, it's just carbs thing, we can then make these junk foods that will then allow people to continue eating junk foods on a low carb diet, and then they'll think it's healthy even though it's not. And actually, the same thing happened. right? With cholesterol and saturated fat. That's why these Cheerios boxes that you were talking about before we started this recording, like that's why Cheerios have this heart healthy label, even if they're bathed in sugar, like Honey Nut Cheerios.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we had this idea back in the 50s through the 70s that because low fat diets that are traditional, Nathan Pritikin would talk about this at length. People wouldn't get heart disease, they didn't get diabetes, they didn't get obesity, etc. Because those are low fat, maybe it's the low fat that's the cause, and then so all you need to do is eat low fat, and so therefore Honey Nut Cheerios are a heart healthy food. So that distortion has already happened, and I think that distortion can happen again, and that's the only thing that I'm not the only thing, that is like one of the main things that I'm harping on. What seems to be a short-term heuristic to help people to lose weight, what I mean by that is a rule that people can use to, even though it's not necessarily exactly representative of reality, it helps people to go through life in such a way that's beneficial to them. So if carbs tend to be the very hyperpalatable thing that causes people to gain weight, then just saying reduce carbs, then you're not going to gain weight. While those in the short term can work, in the long term, by being distortive, they can over time become counterproductive through that mechanism. And
I completely agree.
That's my main concern here, and that's why I sort of get all up in arms. I'm not against paleo. I'm not against people who, although there's some aspects of it I don't like as much, but I'm not against people losing weight. I'm just worried that these distortions are going to lead to unintended consequences. I think we're in agreement there. And so, yeah.
There's an old phrase in data science that it's all models are wrong, but some are useful.
Right. Yep. Over different time courses, right? Some of them are useful maybe for 5 years until we get the low carb junk food, and then they're not going to be useful anymore.
Yeah. But it's like, with most people, I actually say, don't eat fake food.
Right. Yeah.
There is the whole thing of where, I lost the weight not doing low carb. That is a thing that happened.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are like, but I like this thing or I like that thing. And it's like, well, you got to make a choice.
For sure.
And I made the choice, and it's like, well, how dare you? It's like, there are people who literally get absolutely pissed because I had the audacity to lose the weight. And it's like, why you get angry at me? You can do it too.
Yeah.
I will literally, because like Mark Sisson's book, I'm not going to say it's the greatest book in the universe. It's not. But I will literally buy them a copy of it if they want to try it.
Sure.
And they're like, no, I don't want to read it. It's like, you can borrow my copy. I'll buy you a copy, whatever. I don't want to read it. And then they go wander off to McDonald's. And I'm like, but what? Why get angry at me and you're going to McDonald's? Right. Why don't you get angry at yourself?
I understand how you feel, for sure. It's like crabs in a barrel. They just want to pull other people down because somebody's doing something different. It's working for them. They don't want to change. And also it's hard to see other people be successful about things, especially whenever you are sure, you've been told that that's the wrong way to do things. Man, it's tough. It's like, that's one thing about people I don't like very much often. They get mad at your success.
Because the way I see it, if somebody does something completely different than me and it succeeds, I want to hear every part of it.
Sure.
Because I'm very interested in how all this stuff works. I'm a scientist at heart, and it's like, if you did something completely the opposite, like if you went and ate all the carbs and ate all the horrible stuff and you lost weight and you're in perfect health otherwise, I want to hear about it.
Yep.
Because that sounds weird, but it's interesting.
There's people probably like that here in the general. So I think that this has been a good discussion. I appreciate this. This is actually, to some degree, this helps to restore some of my faith in humanity. So thank you so much. I think I've enjoyed this exchange. So
yeah, that was great.
All right. Thank you, sir.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
And that's it for the first episode of the Diet Wars podcast. I hope the rest of your week is amazing. Signing off, the infamous, the controversial, the notorious Kevin Bass. See you later.